Funny how my mind goes blank when I try to remember their names, but crystal clear when I recall the exact figure, $82,000. That's what they owe me, and somehow that number shines brighter in my memory than the faces of the ones who keep insisting I'm losing it. It hadn't always been this way. There was a time I carried every detail in my head as neatly as a filing cabinet. Birthdays, middle names, the brand of whiskey each friend preferred, even the exact number of tiles in the kitchen floor. But as the years pressed forward, people began to talk. My pauses in conversation became proof. My slow retrieval of a word became evidence. "You okay, Tom?" they'd ask with that patronizing tilt of the head. "Of course I'm okay," I'd say, forcing a smile. "Why wouldn't I be?" "Just checking," they'd reply, lingering on the word like it was supposed to soothe me. The rumors spread faster than I could stop them. "He's slipping. He forgets things. Maybe it's time he got checked out." It was all whispered, all sideways glances over coffee or half-drunk wine. But here's the part that made me laugh in bitter silence. I may forget where I set my keys or what day of the week it is, but the debt ledger in my mind remains ironclad. I could see every dollar lent, every desperate handshake, every "I swear I'll pay you back, Tom." Take Brian, for instance. He'd sat across from me 3 winters ago, wringing his hands like a man about to be sentenced. "Just 20 grand to keep the business afloat," he'd pleaded. 2 months tops, I'll have it back in 2 months. "You're sure?" I'd ask, narrowing my eyes. "Positive. You know me, Tom. I'm good for it." I had always wanted to believe that people were good for their word. So I signed the check. Or Lydia. Oh, Lydia. Smooth-talking, doe-eyed Lydia with her emergency medical bills. She cried real tears, her hands trembling when she swore she'd pay me back. 10,000 that time. And all I got in return was silence, then avoidance, and finally, the whisper campaign that I was losing my mind. Convenient, isn't it? Label the creditor forgetful, and maybe the debt vanishes with his memory. The night it all boiled over was at Martin's house. He'd invited half the old gang, a mix of neighbors, business acquaintances, and parasites who called themselves friends. I walked in and felt the air shift immediately. People stiffened, smiles faltered, eyes darted toward me like I was some fragile old man wandering into a party uninvited. "Tom!" Martin said too loudly, like volume would disguise condescension. "Glad you made it! Wasn't sure you'd remember." A smattering of laughter followed, sharp as glass. I clenched my teeth and forced a chuckle, though my chest burned with rage. Later, in the dining room, I caught Lydia whispering to Brian. "He didn't even recognize me when I walked in," she said, smirking. Brian leaned closer. "Told you. His memory's gone. He's not all there anymore." I stood at the doorway, unseen, their words like knives in the back. But here's the thing. I didn't recognize Lydia's face right away, no. But her debt? Her 10,000? That I remembered with painful precision. Brian's 20 burned into my brain like a brand. And Martin, my gracious host that night, 42,000, the biggest loan of them all. So when the toasts began and the glasses clinked, I raised my voice above the chatter. "You know," I said, smiling wide, "I may be forgetting things these days. Sometimes faces slip away, sometimes names vanish. But numbers never leave me." The room grew still, dozens of eyes fixed on me, wary. 82,000, I continued, savoring the tension. "That is the total sum owed to me by some of the very fine people in this room. Funny, isn't it? I can't remember what you had for breakfast, Martin, but I remember your 42 grand. Lydia, I may forget your name tomorrow, but your 10,000? Unforgettable. And Brian, Brian, 20,000, still outstanding. You always said 2 months. What's it been now? 3 years. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Martin's glass slipped from his hand and shattered against the floor. Lydia's cheeks drained of color. Brian stammered, "Tom, maybe we should what?" I snapped. "Pretend it never happened? Hope I forget, like you all whisper I'm forgetting everything else?" The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. I felt something swell inside me. Not shame, not fear, but triumph. They had tried to bury me under the lie of fading memory, but debts, like sins, have a way of surviving. "You think I'm losing it?" I said finally, scanning the room. "Well, maybe I am. Maybe tomorrow I won't know your names, but money talks louder than memory, and I'll remember those numbers until the day I die." No one dared to respond. The only sound was the faint drip of spilled wine running off the edge of Martin S. polished table. I turned, walked toward the door, and left them in their silence. And though their faces blurred behind me, the number 82,000 glowed sharp and steady in my mind, unshakable, undeniable, proof that I was not the one truly lost. Outside, the night was cool, the kind of crisp air that usually cleared my head. But my thoughts weren't foggy. Not tonight. My pulse thudded steady, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight shift off me and onto them, where it belonged. Still, the scene replayed in my mind. The gasps, the broken glass, the pale faces. Good. Let it haunt them. I wasn't 5 steps down the walkway before Martin's voice called after me. "Tom, wait!" His shoes clicked against the stone as he hurried out. "You can't just... Look, you blindsided us in there." I stopped, turned slowly. His face was flushed, a bead of sweat running down his temple despite the night's chill. "Blindsided?" I asked. "You think debts go away just because no one mentions them?" "Lower your voice," he hissed, glancing at the open doorway. "People are still inside." "Good," I said. "Let them hear." Martin's jaw tightened. He had been slick for years, always the man with the easy grin and the quick excuse. But tonight, I had stripped the polish off him. "Listen, Tom," he said carefully. "We'll sort this out. But maybe you're remembering wrong. You've been... you know..." He tapped his temple lightly. "Not yourself." I almost laughed in his face. "You think I wrote 42,000 on a napkin and stuck it in a drawer? No. I keep records. Paper, signed, dates. Would you like me to bring copies to your next cocktail party?" The color drained further from his face. He muttered something under his breath and walked back inside without another word. I knew what would happen after that night. They'd regroup, whisper, plot damage control. They'd try to spin it as me lashing out, confused, maybe even senile. But I wasn't finished. The very next morning, I sat at my desk with the oak surface scarred from years of use and pulled out my binder. Every loan, every signature, every promise was there, cataloged with meticulous care. My hands trembled not with age, but with adrenaline as I sorted the documents into envelopes. Lydia's note, folded neatly with her trembling signature. Brian's IOU scribbled in his hasty scrawl. Martin's polished letterhead, no less, with a date and sum circled in red. I addressed each envelope and walked them to the post office myself. Certified mail, return receipt requested. When they signed for those letters, they couldn't pretend anymore. 2 days later, Brian was the first to crack. He called me late in the evening, his voice shaking. "Tom, why would you send that? My wife opened it. She nearly had a fit." "Maybe she should know where the money went," I said. "You don't understand," he whispered. "If people find out I borrowed..." "They'll find out you didn't pay it back," I cut him off. "There's a difference." Silence stretched across the line. Finally, he muttered, "I'll get the money. Just give me time." "You've had time," I said flatly, and hung up. Lydia called next, all sweetness and pleading. "Tom, darling, you know I've always adored you. I'll pay you back, of course, but sending letters, it's humiliating." "Good," I said. "Maybe humiliation will remind you better than your conscience has." But Martin didn't call. Instead, a lawyer's letter arrived a week later, filled with flowery accusations about my declining faculties and unfounded claims. He thought he could intimidate me, What he didn't know was that I'd already anticipated it. I'd walked into my own lawyer's office the same day I sent the envelopes, binder in hand. "You'll take this case?" I asked, setting the binder on her desk. She flipped through the documents, her brow arching higher with each page. "Mr. Carraway," she said, "these are airtight. If they're saying you're incompetent, then they're desperate. And desperation doesn't win in court. When Martin's lawyer tried to dismiss me as a forgetful old man, my attorney slid those signed notes across the table like aces in a poker game. And in that moment, watching their smug certainty crack, I felt younger than I had in years. Because even if their names blurred in my mind tomorrow, the numbers remained, etched in permanence. And numbers don't lie. The war had only just begun, but I no longer feared it. For the first time, they were the ones scrambling to remember, and I was the one who would never forget. The trial moved slower than I wanted. Weeks stretched into months, each delay orchestrated by Martin's lawyer, who filed motions and objections like confetti, trying to exhaust me. They thought I'd falter, that my patience would crack before theirs. But they underestimated the sharpness of memory that survives when everything else fades. The memory of betrayal. Every morning I walked into that courtroom with my binder. My lawyer called it the Bible. She said it half joking, but I knew it was no exaggeration. That binder wasn't just paper and ink. It was my shield, my sword, my proof against the whispered claims that I was losing my mind. The first to break was Brian. During cross-examination, my lawyer slid his IOU across the table. His handwriting was unmistakable, sloppy, rushed, with that telltale loop in his Y. "Mr. Hale," my lawyer asked, her voice cutting, "is this your signature?" Brian squirmed in the witness chair, sweat beading on his forehead. I don't recall," he mumbled. "Don't recall," she pressed. "Would you like us to bring in a handwriting expert?" "No!" His voice cracked. "I mean, yes, it's mine, but things were different then, I thought." "You thought you wouldn't have to pay it back?" she finished. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Brian slumped forward, shoulders sagging. By the time he left the stand, his fate was sealed. Lydia tried a different tactic: tears. When she testified, her voice trembled, as if every word weighed too much for her throat. "Tom was like family to me," she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "I never meant to. It was for medical bills. I would have paid him back if I could." Her lawyer leaned into the sympathy angle, painting her as a struggling single woman in over her head. But my attorney was merciless. "Ms. Lowell," she said, "is this the same year you purchased a Mercedes?" Lydia froze. "That's not relevant." "It's entirely relevant. You claimed financial hardship while driving a car worth more than the loan you requested." The mask cracked then, the doe-eyed victim slipping into the hard-jawed woman who'd whispered that I was losing my mind. She glared at me from the stand, no tears left, only venom. But it was Martin who thought he could outwit us all. He strutted to the stand like it was his stage, his smile tight but confident. He denied everything, said I was confused, that no loan had ever been made, that maybe I'd mistaken generosity for business. And then my lawyer slid his letterhead across the table. His signature gleamed in black ink, the sum written bold and underlined. Martin picked it up, scanned it, and for the briefest moment his mask slipped, his eyes widened, his hand trembled. This isn't mine," he said finally, his voice shaking. "Are you denying this is your signature?" "Yes." "Then we'll bring in an expert." The courtroom buzzed again. I sat back, a quiet satisfaction blooming in my chest. He'd cornered himself with his own arrogance. Outside the courthouse that day, a small crowd had gathered, reporters, curious neighbors, even a few old acquaintances who'd once whispered about my failing memory. Their eyes followed me, not as the man slipping into forgetfulness, but as the man who remembered what mattered. One reporter shoved a microphone toward me. Mr. Carraway, do you feel vindicated? I paused, binder still in my hand. I feel, I said slowly, that people mistake forgetting a name for forgetting the truth. But the truth has a way of staying sharp, no matter how much time dulls the edges. The trial pressed on, but the momentum had shifted. Every delay only made them sweat harder. Every excuse crumbled under the weight of my records. At night, when I sat alone in my quiet house, sometimes the faces blurred together. I'd stand in the kitchen, unable to recall what I'd come in for. I'd stare at a photograph on the wall and struggle for the names of the smiling faces in it. But the numbers? Always there. 42,000, 20,000, 10,000. Together, 82,000. That clarity kept me steady, and I knew, before this was over, they'd pay, not just in dollars, but in the dignity they'd stolen from me. It was during the third month of hearings that the cracks in their personal lives began to show, spilling into the courtroom like dirty water seeping through a wall. Brian arrived one morning looking hollowed out, eyes sunken, shirt wrinkled like he'd slept in it. He avoided my gaze, but I noticed his wife sitting in the back row, arms folded so tight they seemed carved from stone. Midway through testimony, when my lawyer asked him about the boat he'd supposedly sold, his wife suddenly stood and hissed across the room, "You didn't sell it! You gave it to your mistress!" The judge's gavel came down hard, but the damage was done. Brian's reputation, already fragile, had shattered in front of everyone. Lydia fared no better. The sympathy she'd tried to muster evaporated when the court subpoenaed her financial records. The numbers didn't lie. While she'd begged me for help with medical bills, she'd been funneling money into cosmetic treatments, vacations, and luxury shopping. When my lawyer presented the evidence, the spectators in the gallery erupted in whispers. Lydia's carefully crafted image of fragile innocence crumbled to dust. She didn't cry anymore. She sat there with her jaw clenched, eyes darting like a fox caught in a trap. And Martin, the proud, untouchable Martin, his downfall was the sweetest. The handwriting expert testified that the signature on his loan agreement was indeed authentic. The expert's words rang like a death knell in the courtroom. Martin tried to object, his voice rising, veins bulging in his neck, but the judge silenced him. "Mr. Halstead," the judge said firmly, "the evidence is clear. Do not insult this court further." By then, the case had drawn more attention than I'd ever imagined. Local papers ran stories about the old man who remembered the debt, and people I hadn't spoken to in years called to offer support. It was strange, being painted as both fragile and formidable in the same breath. They wrote about my fading memory, but always followed it with the line, "Yet he remembered every dollar owed." I began to feel a certain power in that contradiction. Let them think I couldn't recall a name. I didn't need names. I had numbers, and numbers were undeniable. The night before closing arguments, I sat in my living room with the binder open on my lap. My lawyer had gone over everything 100 times, but I still turned each page slowly, savoring the neat rows of ink, the signatures frozen in time. Each loan had its story. Each story had its betrayal. And tomorrow, I would finally see them all held accountable. Sleep came late. I dreamed of faces I couldn't name, blurred and distant. The courtroom was packed the next morning, buzzing with anticipation. Reporters leaned forward in their seats, pens poised. The defendants sat in a row, looking less like old friends and more like criminals awaiting sentence. My lawyer stood tall and delivered her argument with precision, her voice steady as steel. "This case is not about memory lapses, Your Honor. It's about written promises, about trust betrayed, about debts unpaid. My client may forget names, but he does not forget justice, and neither should this court." When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly. The room went silent. "They called me forgetful," I began, my voice echoing against the wood-paneled walls. "They said I was losing my memory. Maybe they're right. Maybe one day soon I won't remember their names or even this courtroom. But I'll tell you what I will remember, what I will never forget. $82,000. Earned, lent, and stolen under the guise of friendship. That number burns brighter than any lie they've told. And if that makes me forgetful, then I pray I never remember the kind of people they've become. The judge leaned back, his eyes fixed on me for a long, quiet moment. Then he nodded. I've heard enough. The gavel struck once, and the verdict began to unfold. The judge's voice carried with a weight that seemed to press the whole room into silence. In reviewing the evidence, he began, his tone steady and unyielding, this court finds the promissory notes binding and enforceable. Mr. Carraway's claims are substantiated. The defendants are hereby ordered to repay the outstanding loans in full. $42,000 from Mr. Halstead, $20,000 from Mr. Hale, and $10,000 from Ms. Lowell, plus interest accrued. The words landed like thunder. Martin shot to his feet, slamming his palm against the table. This is outrageous, he roared. He's senile. This court is letting a confused old man ruin lives. The gavel cracked down. Sit down, Mr. Halstead, or you'll be held in contempt. Lydia gasped, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. But I don't have it. I can't. The judge's eyes cut to her. You will find a way. Failure to comply will result in seizure of assets and further legal consequences. Brian didn't move. His face had gone chalk white, his mouth slightly open, as though all the fight had drained from him at once. His wife, still in the gallery, shook her head slowly, lips pressed into a thin, merciless line. The murmurs in the courtroom swelled, reporters scribbling furiously, spectators leaning forward as if they'd just witnessed the final scene of a play. But for me, there was no swelling triumph, no gloating satisfaction, just a steady calm, like a storm that had finally broken and passed. When the judge dismissed us, I gathered my binder and walked toward the door. I didn't look at them, didn't need to. The sound of Martin's muffled curses, Lydia's sobbing, Brian's silence. It was enough. Outside, the press surged around me. Mr. Carraway, do you feel vindicated? What will you do with the money once it's repaid? Do you have anything to say to those who doubted your memory? I paused, the cameras flashing in my eyes. For a brief moment, their names escaped me, blurred like faces in an old photograph. But the numbers came sharp and clear, as they always did. I don't care if I forget every name in this town, I said, my voice carrying across the crowd. I remember the truth, and the truth has been paid back in full. The next weeks unfolded like a slow unraveling. Brian's boat was sold at auction, his neighbors whispering about the mistress his wife had discovered. Lydia's Mercedes disappeared from her driveway, her designer wardrobe picked apart by collectors to settle debts. Martin fought tooth and nail, appealing, delaying, raging, but the judgment was ironclad. His name, once spoken with respect in business circles, became a punchline for arrogance brought low. As for me, I sat in my quiet house, binder closed for the first time in years. Some nights I'd forget what I'd eaten for dinner, or I'd struggle to place the name of a neighbor waving from across the street. But when I saw the cleared balance sheets, the receipts of repayment, the hard evidence that justice had been served, I felt no fear of forgetfulness, because I knew this much. Memory may fade, but truth endures, and the truth was written, signed, and sealed in ink. The number 82,000 no longer burned like a wound. It rested like a scar, proof of what I'd survived and of what they could never take from me. The years after the verdict were quieter, though not empty. Word of what had happened spread through the town like wildfire. People who'd once looked at me with pity now offered nods of respect, sometimes even stopping me in the grocery store just to shake my hand. "You showed them, Mr. Carraway," they'd say. Or, "Sharp as ever, Tom. Sharp as ever." I'd smile politely, though sometimes I couldn't place their faces. The names slipped through me like water, but the tone of their voices, The gratitude lingered. I didn't need to know who they were to understand what they meant. I'd become something more than just myself. I was the story they told, the man who remembered what counted when everyone said he couldn't. The money came back slowly, in installments pried from their accounts by court order. Checks arrived in stiff envelopes stamped with official seals, each one a small victory. I didn't spend it recklessly. I paid off the last of my mortgage, repaired the roof, and donated a portion to the local library, though I asked that no plaque or sign bear my name. I wasn't chasing monuments. The victory was mine already. Brian left town first. Rumor had it he divorced, sold his business, and moved somewhere no one knew him. Lydia stayed, but her reputation was shredded beyond repair. No one trusted her smile anymore. It had become a mask everyone could see through. And Martin, he never recovered. The appeal drained him of what money and pride he had left. When I passed him once on Main Street, he looked smaller. His once commanding presence shrunk into a man barely holding himself upright. He didn't meet my eyes. That was enough for me. But time, relentless as it is, still marched on. There were mornings when I'd stand in my kitchen, staring at the coffee pot, unsure whether I'd already brewed a cup. Afternoons when I'd walk into the library I'd helped fund, only to forget what book I'd come for. And sometimes, faces blurred so completely I felt like I was living among strangers in my own hometown. Yet every time I feared I was truly slipping, I'd sit at my desk and open that binder. Not because I needed it anymore, but because it reminded me of the fight I'd won. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air turned golden, a boy knocked on my door. Couldn't have been more than 12, holding a school notebook. "Mr. Carraway?" he asked. "That's me," I said. "My teacher told us about what you did. How you stood up when people thought you couldn't tea. I wanted to write about you for my history project. Can you tell me the story?" I looked at him for a long moment, and something warm stirred in me. The details, the names, even the courtroom itself, they all threatened to blur. But the truth remained, sharp and simple. "They said I was losing my memory," I told him, leaning on the doorframe. And maybe I was. But I remembered the promises people made to me. And I made sure they remembered them too. The boy scribbled furiously, nodding, his eyes wide. As he left, I felt a strange peace settle over me. Perhaps even if the memories slipped away, the story wouldn't. It would live on in whispers, in classrooms, in the pages of a school project, or the corners of a newspaper clipping. And maybe in the end, that was enough. The binder stayed on my desk, closed now, no longer a weapon, but a relic. I didn't need to open it anymore. I had already carved my truth into the world, and the world would remember, even if I could not. The binder stayed on my desk, closed now, no longer a weapon, but a relic. I didn't need to open it anymore. I had already carved my truth into the world, and the world would remember, even if I could not. In the end, it was never about the 82,000. It was about proving that a man's worth is not measured by the slips of his memory, but by the weight of his truth. They tried to erase me with whispers of forgetfulness, but I etched myself into history with the one thing that never fades: justice. And though time may one day take every name and every face from me, it can never take that.